that symbol of like having like such a like treasured items from my ancestors and past, just kind of sort of in as part of the soil even.
It's like just putting all those lines on paper is kind of a, I don't know, like a, not, it's sort of spiritual process, or just like kind of my, it's an, I mean, it doesn't mean anything to the landscape, but it's the, I guess, people say attention is love. So it's my way of showing that.
And in a non-romantic way whatsoever, because I think it's really, that's the easiest place to go to when we speak about art, is the romanticism around it. Especially in Alaska, we tend to romanticize it, but I think that's everywhere.
My name is John Hagen, and I'm a photographer and digital artist, and I guess now I'm also a curator up in Anchorage. Um, the photographs I'm showing at the art center are artistic exploration of the village where my family has lived for millennia, actually. Working there and fishing there in the summers. I studied photojournalism in Alaska and took pictures across the state for newspapers, and went back and got my art degree, and I've been doing what I can to show my work since. So I I I I like to describe some of the work I do as a mix of journalism and landscape photography. If I lived in places that had more streets, I'd probably be a street photographer. But so I'm going to actually be showing a few extra pictures in my slideshow that I didn't show, that aren't being shown at the Bunnell Street Center. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share. Okay, let's see if we can play this. I'm sorry, Asia, can you see the photos off to the,
Yeah.
or
No, you're in the presentation mode.
presentation mode? Okay.
Thank you.
So this first slide is actually, this is where I was photographing. This is out on Bristol Bay, starting to get to the Ugashik River drainage. And this is actually the spot I photographed. This is where my family is from. And this is actually looking, this is from a small little drone. And I took this picture. Directly under the drone is my family's fish camp, and where my grandma lived, and my but from what I can tell, like right in the middle of this picture, and from what my aunt has told me, that is where my grandma was raised, and the site of her kind of the ancestral Barabara. I'm kind of messing that one, but the old Unangan style pit houses. So this is where my ancestors are from. But I started this project kind of as an exploration of the results of a pandemic 100 years ago, the Spanish flu, that did a pretty good job at wiping out most of my family and relatives that were living in this area. It was a pretty sizable village at one point, and I think right now there's a permanent residency of 7. So there's a lot of people that weren't there anymore. So it was kind of exploring that place. And I start off exploring this in actually pre-pandemic. That's kind of the challenge for me. I proposed this project, and I started it with before COVID was a thing, and I really kind of want to explore. This first slide is actually, this is where I was photographing. This is out on Bristol Bay, starting to get to the Ugashik River drainage, and this is actually the spot I photographed. This is where my family is from, and my family's fish camp, and where my grandma lived, and my but from what I can tell, like right in the middle of this picture, and from what my aunt has told me, that is where my grandma was raised, and but the old Unangan style pit houses. So this is where my ancestors are from. But I started this project kind of as an exploration of the results of a pandemic 100 years ago, the Spanish flu, that did a good job at wiping out most of my family and relatives that were living in this area. It was a pretty sizable village at one point, and I think right now there's a permanent residency of 7. So there's a lot of people that weren't there anymore. I proposed this project and I started it with before COVID was a thing, and I really kind of want to explore a point in 1918 where there's a bit of a severing of my ancestral heritage. So I didn't know when I started this that in the middle of the project I'd actually be experiencing probably some of the same things that were happening then, and I'll talk about that in the next. Some of the themes I explore through this project are this, in some ways, abandonment, things that happen, like, and that life that happens after everybody isn't there anymore. This is kind of an interesting spot that there's old cannery at one point, and even there's a whole history that happened after 1918. Salmon is pretty huge here. That's the reason my family has a camp there, but there's a lot of things that haven't, like, even it is a spot that it's difficult to get stuff out to, and it's really difficult to bring stuff back from. So there's a lot of fishing operations out there, and it's all about getting stuff out there, and then once you're done using it, once you're not going to fish out there anymore, it kind of eats itself up, and things degrade and fall into the environment. So like, for me, one of the interesting things I found is how quickly things go to disrepair if people aren't actively living in them and actively taking care of them. This is such a tough place, and it's such a hungry sort of place that the land almost eats things, eats stuff that isn't tended to. So this cabin might not have been used for 20 or 30 years, but or might even not been used for a handful of years, but it's uninhabitable now, and I don't think I'd be able to even rehab it. I think this is one that it's just trying to think where I'm at. I guess this is one of the things that was really interested in exploring out there, is kind of this point where nature starts to take over. There's this fair amount of things. You can drag boats out of the water, you can dig up house posts of buildings that have collapsed, but eventually it's all about nature taking over. I guess I think in one of my artist statements I described, I was looking, didn't necessarily go looking for ghosts, but maybe I knew that there would be a little bit more of a presence here. But I was always looking for signs of life. I started photographing out. I took a break. Let's see, I had been commercial fishing in Haines, Alaska, for summers for like 6 or 7 years, and I decided I didn't really want to keep fishing there. I wanted to change of pace, so I started looking to my family, and I wanted to actually fish where I'm from and or where I'm really from. So um, in 2019, I went to go out to fish with my aunt and uncle in this site, and the first thing that happened to me when I went on this that very same fishing boat is I fell down and broke my wrist and I couldn't fish. So the first thing I fortunately I had been made pictures in a really short amount of time that um, and so I had to leave and leave because it's a really hard place to be hurt. And I had plans on coming back to Bristol Bay in 2020. Um, but what happened in the winter of 2019 to 2020 is the COVID pandemic, started kicking up. Um, I really wanted to make sure with my aunt that it'd be okay to still come out to Bristol Bay. And I was going to be fishing, but I wanted to be creating a lot of art and creating photography while I was out there. One of the for me, a really interesting thing, an exciting thing about being out in Bush, Alaska is the community and being able to see people and visit with them and the sense of community that happens when you're out there. And that was the first thing I was encountered when I arrived in Bristol Bay in 2020, in the summer of 2020, is I was pretty much encouraged not to go outside of our fish camp and work with other people. There really wasn't many people out there. This is a really small town. Like I said, there's 7 people that live there year round, but in the summertime, there should have been like 60 or so people. This particular summer, there's 20 of them, and which really wasn't very many people. So it was really weird feeling some of the same like levels of suspicion about other people and concerns about other people, and interacting with them. I planned on doing a whole portrait aspect of this project when I was out there, right, instead of just plain landscapes, and that wasn't necessarily going to be reality. So I just focused on kind of exploring this level of loneliness that you feel when you can't really talk to people and all you can do is walk around and take pictures. This was actually right outside of the cabin. This is, for me, this is actually the view. This cabin was part of the view that I got to see every day when I left my little fish shack. And so I took a lot of pictures of this particular cabin through a couple of summers. But so I had a lot of practice in this. This is, for me, is how that part of Bristol Bay felt. So this is actually for I went to this part of Bristol Bay about 20 years ago when I was a younger kid just out of high school and fishing. And for me, I was interesting seeing this spot because this was at one point a basketball court that was newly installed when the first year I went out there, gosh, 20 years ago. And it was interesting how it was starting to go away. The hoop had long gone, had fallen over and was long gone. But this is an old skiff that was actually filled with scrap wood, and I was led to understand at some point it would become scrap itself. Um, this is a image of a cannery building that at one point was on the verge of collapse and it was getting ready to fall down, but it had strong enough bones that folks that work in the village were looking to rehabilitate it and build it up. I think this last summer they had replaced all the windows, so he was actually had been sealed off. Um, this is that kind of where I wanted to find that the feelings of one of the things I found when I was one of the things I found when I was actually wandering off in the grass, kind of exploring around. And it struck me because that this is what happens when you leave stuff leave stuff be in the tundra. It has a tendency to almost eat it. Um, I was starting to imagine this four-wheeler turning into a fossil of some sort, or um, not even just a fossil, just slowly becoming part of the archaeological record out there. I was kind of struck by this building about how neat it looked, how as and I could even you can in this picture you can sort of see it, but um, the nails were slowly working out of the planks, and it was just as it was weathering, it was falling apart. And some of these pictures are from the one of my earlier iterations of this project, and I kind of kept seeing repeated crosses through things, and I was exploring that. This is pretty much yeah, how remote this place was. Sort of more of those repeated crosses. And that's a caribou skull over there. I definitely wanted to capture how this place felt, and how alone it felt, and how in some ways also free. It was a that's my grandfather's skiff. I guess he at one point he was one of the Bristol Bay fishermen that would fish in sailboats, but as he got older, he switched to set netting, which he um, some folks from Alaska might know what that is, but it's where you tie off your net is tied to the shore and anchored out, and you wait for salmon to swim through it. But so what are a lot of all my images start off as color images. It's one of the pieces of magic that comes from black and white, or comes from digital, I mean. I started off I have a little bit more freedom to express myself in using black and white, or to convert images to black and white to get as much color. I definitely wanted to um, evoke feelings of some of the more classic landscape photographers while I was out here. Um, but I would prefer to work in film, but in a place as remote as this, it would have been really difficult to deal with chemistry out there, and I wanted to make sure I would deal with the chemistry properly and responsibly. So um, I work in digital. I think there's parts of these boats, like the engines, I think they're working to um, some of the environmental work the tribe, Ugashic tribe does involves pulling engines out of some of these old boats and getting them recycled and make sure the oil is taken care of. But it's kind of part of that thing where you just stuff gets brought out to Bristol Bay, but doesn't necessarily get pulled out or removed. And like a lot of things that happen out there really force you to be present. Like whether you're working in a boat or driving in a four-wheeler, or just needing to pay attention as you're walking around looking for um, bears and such. Like I find myself needing to be very present there, and somewhat being open for all these little changes that happen around you. Um, it even in a 1 week period, like the weather can change so greatly. Even a 1 day period, the weather changes. So like it was always important. Like could find myself waiting for perfect times to take pictures. I had like a weird experience where there's a wildfire, a small grass fire, and we had to help put that out. And one of the things we did was digging lines to try and clear that up. And I remember going there afterwards, and I could see there were beads in the dirt, beads in the grass, and that was kind of a pretty powerful symbol for me, and something I definitely reflect on. It's just like just how much of your culture can just be there, like that symbol of like having like such a like treasured item my ancestors and past just kind of sort of in as part of the soil even.
My name is Kristen Link, and I can also relate to places that feel free and lonely, though I guess I have my own personal history with them and way of looking at them too. I'm honored to share my work at Bunnell in October. I work as a fine artist, science illustrator, and educator, inspired by the natural world. My work can get kind of broad, especially in all those different fields, but one thing that unites it is kind of my search for place. So I'm always trying to find place. Part of that is growing up, moving around in a lot of different areas and coming to Alaska as an adult. And kind of finding my home here. So yeah, now I live on the Nizina River outside McCarthy, Alaska, on the edge of the Wrangell State Elias and on Ahtna Athabascan land. So this is one drawing that I did of ocean waves while I was out at sea doing an artist residency on a research vessel. And the word that kind of resonates for me when I think about kind of what I'm looking for or thinking about with this work is solastalgia, which is a word created by Glenn Albrecht. And it is sort of like a nostalgia or homesickness for the place where we are, because we know that it's changing. So a lot of times when you look this up, there's a lot of negativity associated with it because they talk about climate change and a lot of the kind of like trauma that people feel as the landscape's changing. And there is a lot of sadness for me tied in it. I kind of started creating this as a place to put that sadness, but in doing that, I also try and find aspects of positive and beauty in the places that I'm studying. So this is another cyanotype from one interesting thing. Like I know where all these places are and they're all from my experiences, but I sort of, I took the places out, I separated them. Like I don't have the names of the places in the titles. I guess I'll talk a little bit about some of them, but this one's on the edge of the Bagley ice field. But they're also, even though they're specific places to me, I think they're also large, you know, they're connected to bigger ecosystems and bigger place. So in some ways, I think they stand in for bigger places too. And it matters, but it also doesn't need to matter so much exactly, specifically where they are. So one of the things that drew me to Alaska was being able to spend time in the winter in the mountains, and in my time living here, getting to go out and see and spend time on glaciers, spending time with the Juneau Icefield Research Program and seeing science work that's being done studying glaciers and how they're changing, being out there with by myself, but then also with other people, and seeing how spending time in landscapes like that kind of form communities and change people. And making some sketches and artwork out there. So I do some field sketching as part of my practice, but then take that work back and kind of do my own studio work from it. these pictures are all from the Root Glacier, which is right outside Kennecott and near McCarthy. And I think getting to know that place and taking people hiking on that glacier and really being there every day and seeing it year after year and how it's changed, like kind of getting to know that place like a person in some ways, because the features will like freeze up and then melt over the course of the summer. And then the next year they'll be there, but they'll change. And the way you get on the glacier changes. So it's been kind of meaningful to build that relationship with that place, and building that relationship with the glacier, it kind of led to me wanting to make more artwork about it. And these are more field sketches from just kind of being out in that glaciated environment. One thing that is interesting to me about it too is that it's not, and it ties to kind of being on the research vessel also, which is this one. It's that it's a place where people go and do research and study and find out things about themselves, but it's not a place where people usually spend a lot of time living. So there's something that's kind of like cold and remote about that as well, that makes me want to share it with people and kind of like share that aspect. And in drawing glaciers, I am always interested in kind of that connection, how when the ice moves, a lot of times it looks like water and you can see it flowing. So there's a kind of like physical connection between drawing that ice moving and then trying to draw waves standing still. So the way like drawing the ocean waves, it's something that's moving. The glaciers are moving really slowly, so they don't appear to be moving when you're looking at them, but it's an interesting art experience to kind of draw these. I like kind of making that similarity between the two structures and the abstraction that you get when you try and draw water with a pen and then not in motion. It's kind of that thing, but it's not. It's something different as well. I wanted to share a little bit about my process of how I create the images. So I got to see the work of, or for people who don't know, cyanotype is an alternative photographic process where you put chemicals on paper or another substrate and then expose it to UV light, and it creates a negative image of what you're exposing. So it has been used, like by Anna Atkins was the first person to use it as a photographic medium to make a field guide of British seaweed, but is also used to create reproductions of drawings, technical blueprints. So it's a photographic medium, but it also has a history of being used with drawing. And I started playing around with it because I wanted to make reproductions of my drawings, because it takes so much time to kind of create all that line work in space. And I wanted to figure out a way to make prints of it that were kind of easy. So cyanotype isn't actually that easy to do, but it's reproducible. And what I do is I make drawings on a transparent vellum, and then I place that on top of the cyanotype paper and put it outside in the sun. So, you know, on warm sunny days, or this is actually when I was doing an artist residency in Whitehorse and it was like 30 below out. We just need sunshine, which is one thing that is kind of an interesting dialogue too with the glaciers, because I'm using the sun, which is melting the glaciers, but also creating the artwork. And then when the transparency is kind of separated from the paper, sometimes it'll get a blurred effect, which I don't have any control over how that happens or not, because it's just the paper warping as it happens, and it kind of depends on the humidity and the weather. But I love the way that blurred effect can kind of like create that feeling of like being close and far away to something. And the way the cyanotypes capture that feeling of memory, and of places that are changing. So the experience I have a lot when I'm there is seeing them and appreciating them, but then coming to the understanding of like being in a place that isn't going to be there for very long. So part of what I'm exhibiting is a series of small kind of snapshots, which is how this project started, of kind of 4x6-inch images. And I started it as a 100-day project, just drawing the glaciers that I've experienced and have photos from. So I usually draw from my photos and then make photos from my drawings. And in the process of printing, I'll get kind of like a variation in the prints, but I'll often come in and add skies to them as well. So these are a selection of, I have 40 of these up, but they're kind of, again, just showing those different variations in place. And I think because they're sort of small in that 4x6 format, they feel like photographs or kind of like mementos or memories. And then I also wanted to kind of nod to that process of drawing. And for me, the drawing process is very meditative, and I wanted to include some of like my original drawings. So I made these 2 large format pen and ink drawings on mulberry rice paper, but they're mounted on a panel with acrylic medium, so they have kind of a textural experience that doesn't show up so much in the photo. They're 24 by 36 inches, so they kind of have that space to get into the line work. And that meditative process for me of building the line work is important for kind of the relationship I have with my art and the place. It's sort of like a process of, it feels like a process of myself and the subject just kind of like sharing back and forth, not necessarily in a way that we're aware of it. So this one's from kind of a study of the glacier surface. I love all the different lines and how they kind of move in different directions. A lot of times kind of forming a grid or working in like a diagonal grid, forming opposite of each other, because there's the way the glacier cracks, and then there's the way there's sediment that builds into it, and how they flow. And then kind of looking at, again, the waves in the ocean in still form. And again, kind of this is a diptych, kind of, again, comparing glacier to ocean waves, where the glacier sort of spreads out more as it gets closer to the ocean. So it's even closer to that space. And then I've also kind of going back to that, like bringing the drawing and the cyanotype together, experimented with some collage. One of the other themes I'm interested in is like how places change, but also how we kind of come to understand place. So the collage parts are kind of bits of ourselves or myself and parts of how I come to understand a place. When I was working on this, I was also collaborating with the Alaska poet, Jeremy Pataki. So some of our exchange of like back and forth and his editing and notes on kind of writing about place have worked their way into the collages too. So those are a lot of these bits. And then there's also parts of field guides and northern lights and phenomena that feel like magic to me. And then I have a couple studies of rivers and watersheds, thinking about kind of connecting the glaciers to the ocean, and especially because I think that's the place where people most often relate to and live on the rivers. I live on a river, so that's like seeing the glacial river in front of my house, and that for me has been like the greatest lesson in like living in a dynamic landscape, because it changes every day. So in some ways, thinking about climate change and the glaciers going away can bring a lot of sadness, but also just living close to a natural system that changes in its own way has kind of helped, or just given another level of understanding to change in the world. These are both kind of focused on coastlines near where the Copper River, this is the Copper River Delta. So kind of where the glaciers close to my home end up. And they're obviously changing a lot from the melting glaciers as well. And I just put in some of the photos that I'm kind of inspired by as I'm doing this work from being, this is all on the Copper River area. And then this one's studying kind of the moraine textures and swirls that get formed at the end of the glaciers, kind of like the land's moving forward and the glaciers, just like the layers between the ice and the rock at the terminus of a glacier. And this one is, I called Glacier Ghosts, but it's kind of more draws to like the fact of the glaciers disappearing too. They're, this is on the edge of a huge ice field, but there's just this small glacier on the backside of this mountain. And I think that's all I have to share right now, but I'm happy to answer questions if people have them.
I thought, while looking at your work, I had to pause for a minute and reflect on that Latin phrase "Memento Mori," which I've been, I thought about a few times in terms of artists' work. Memento Mori actually means remember that you will die. This idea of just witnessing and, with such scrupulous detail, the way that landscape is changing takes a lot of courage. And I'm really moved by how, just by watching time so slowly, you're clearly also drawing strength and inspiration from that act. It's really interesting work. It's really interesting work.
Yeah, for me, the time of like just putting all those lines on paper is kind of a, I don't know, like it's sort of spiritual process, or just like kind of my, I mean, it doesn't mean anything to the landscape, but it's I guess, people say attention is love. So it's my way of showing that.
Yeah.
One of the things that sort of fascinates me about the process and doing the drawings is that it doesn't look like the thing exactly. There's an abstraction that happens. And so it's it's just another level of interpretation, I guess, of what I'm looking at and kind of which lines I choose to draw. So I love that about taking the time to be an artist, is that you get to do that process.
You get to make those decisions, not anybody
Yeah.
else.
I very much like the comparison between glacier ice and moving water, and the couple of those drawings, I found myself trying to figure out whether it was glacier ice or moving water, and I like that comparison there. I mean, I keep, one of the things I've been reflecting on now as I've been moving around and running around and spending a lot of time in a little faster moving city than I had been in the past of Anchorage, is how much of a luxury it is to stay in front of a spot or reflect on a small piece of nature for an extended period of time. And that's something I almost makes me want to start drawing, to be able to have an excuse to just be in one spot and process one spot so much. Cool. I had a very quick question though. At 35 below, does the cyanotype, can you still process cyanotype? Does it freeze?
The chemicals are dry when you do the exposure, so okay. I just need to take it inside to wash it off afterwards. So you can't, you need to be able to wash the chemicals off after they expose. So you need liquid water for that.
Yeah, I was just trying to,
it works.
I was thinking of other alternative processes that have to be a little bit damp to actually be able to work, but so it's a tough temperature to work in.
Yeah, they actually took a really long time too, because the sun was so low. And we were right next to the Yukon River, which was really cool. So you could like see the river flowing and steaming and doing all those things. It wasn't completely frozen over because it was in Whitehorse by the dam. But yeah, it's cool doing them at different times of year and kind of collaborating with that natural environment part.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Beautiful.
First, John and Kristen, thank you for letting me show with you. It's a real treat. I feel like I've certainly, even a few years ago, I wouldn't have been ready. The place where I am now is a much different place than where I was, you know, last year, even pre-pandemic. Or I always call myself like an accidental number of things, but I never, you know, art wasn't in my life growing up so much, I just knew that I didn't want like a 9-to-5 job when I went to college, and discovered in a communications course of film class, a French New Wave course. And then it's the only time in my life where I got excited, where I actually like had hair on my arms, you know, like stand up. And then my first trip to Alaska was in 94, the summer in 94, to go out to Naknek and to fish. You know, a great teacher of mine in the first film class I ever took back in 1990 said, the only rules you break are the rules you make. So it was like, well, I can handle that, you know. So it was from making for 30 years consistently film, video, and I painted for a long time, and sculptural, and I made a lot of films prior to this that were nature-based, nature influence, landscape influence, but kind of more rapid editing, rapid visually rapid experiences. I had a camera with me, not knowing where it would end up, and I would just sit and take these long 20-minute shots. I never used to be able to do that because for 20 of the 30 or 25 out of the 30 years, I was primarily celluloid based moving image making. So it wouldn't allow a 20-minute shot would cost you like, you know, $2,000 or something to get it processed. So it was really fun to be able to just like make that happen. It's really pleasurable to find something for this show revolving around the environmental observation, because I felt like I really did feel like, oh, I'm finally ready, you know. This was the frame that kind of or the shot, because this thing was in a real-time 18-minute shot that just really allowed me to sit and observe this piece. And it did start with the audio, because initially being a part of this show was going to be an audio piece. So I really started to ask myself, like, what does humans have a very limited range, decibel, and we don't know what really a glacier sounds like, you know. I mean, or we know what it sounds like when it calves. We know what, you know, rain sounds like when it hits a puddle. We know what a bird's and helicopter. So I really was trying to jump outside the box a bit. And I couldn't help but always return to John Luther Adams' piece up at the Museum of the North, the place where you go to listen. He worked collaboratively with the geoscience department, geophysics department up there, and was able to somehow capture through electronic sounds what the aurora borealis sounds like and what the earth sounds like, even in the course of any normal day, let alone an earthquake. And so I was trying to imagine those experiences of like ultrasound waves and infrasound waves, and those levels of audio. And so I worked with existing pop songs and then changed the audio considerably. was thinking a lot about, again, that that launching point of the ultrasound and the infrasound waves and how we get there. And so and also a lot to do with disruption. I felt there's so much happening within the state of image capturing that really is very typical of, you know, kind of the colonial approach to even though I consider myself like a sensitive new age colonizer, just being a non-indigenous person on indigenous land. You know, I'm originally from the Midwest, but I'm German Irish heritage, so it's like it's a vastly complex world we're living in while we're up here. And so I felt this this real, I've been in, it's been a challenging situation to see how many people come up and just sort of like take these gorgeous Alaskan landscape shots and turn them into like a you know, a very straightforward documentary, or use them in advertising purposes to sell a car or something. And I find, I still find that, and probably always will find that, deeply disturbing, because I feel it's doing a real disservice to the beauty of our place up here. And so I would flip the camera upside down. I would flip it sideways. I would take these long shots. I would sit with the space for, you know, 20 minutes at a time for a shot. And, but yet still very concerned about the disappearance of it all. So like that last shot in the video, this is like as the biggest statement as I'll make yet about our disappearing planet. To me, this sums it up in a way that a hard-hitting documentary might, you know, and I feel there are many people doing that, but less people doing it subtly like this, and I embrace that more. So I really, this piece isn't about just purely observing beauty, but it's about seeing, hearing, and feeling beauty in a space and time in the 21st century, even post-pandemic, because I think we're all, even though it wasn't completely intentional, I thought the timing for myself while making this definitely had a lot to do with shutdown and finding the space and the patience within myself to really observe these places around us and being able to speak in a clearer way than I never imagined before. And certainly the pandemic has helped with that for me to be able to really reflect on that. So I don't feel like, I think that's probably all I'll say, if that's cool.
It feels like each of you complementarily think about time with a desire to slow it down and to you know, really deeply root into the moment, to the present moment. And it's at the same time, it's not incredibly sentimental. It actually feels like you're looking at things that are sometimes hard to look at, especially that last shot, Michael. But also, you know, that echoes across to other imagery that we've seen of John's and Kristen's, which, you know, creates a space for feeling and appreciating that's a little bit uncomfortable and also really beautiful.
Just to be able to witness it and to be able to reflect and then create art out of it. It's there's something so magical about just art in general, and in a non-romantic way whatsoever, because I think it's really, that's the easiest place to go to when we speak about art, is the romanticism around it. Especially in Alaska, we tend to romanticize it, but I think that's everywhere. But I can definitely see your point, Asia, and especially with John and Kristen's work, it's a non-romanticized, we're not like going, you know, this isn't Alaskan porn, you know, for lack of a better word. This is just really reflective, personal, hard-hitting stuff I think we're speaking about, but we're also showing beauty, I think.
I'm curious more about one other thing that kind of like ties the three of our works together is the water coming through. And I'm curious, Michael, how like you talked about how you wanted to use water to like show a different view, and it also does a part of kind of abstracting the landscape in its own way because you're looking at the reflection often. But I was just curious your thoughts about why so much of your imagery focuses on water.
I've made a lot of works using water. I just feel it's I guess it's a comfort zone. It's a language I can speak to.
Thank you all so much. I'm really excited to see you down here at Bunnell in just a few minutes. Really appreciate the extra time. It's a really nice experience to be all together in this space looking at each other's work. Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks, Asia. Thanks, John.
We'll
Thanks,
see ya.
Kristen.
We'll see you.